Welcome back for another episode of the Happy at Work podcast with Laura, Tessa, and Michael.
Each week, we have thoughtful conversations with leaders, founders, and authors about happiness at work.
Tune in each Thursday for a new conversation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Happy at Work podcast. We are so excited to have Julie Winkle Giulioni here with us today. And Julie, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're a business owner. We're so excited for you to be with us today, to talk with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and a bit about your career?
Yeah, and I am so happy to be here with all of you, Laura. Thank you for having me. I come out of my whole career has been in some way, shape, or form about learning and development and growth. My very first job, I taught modeling and charm to children. And there was something about that experience, like testing, how could I present something or enable something, encourage, reinforce something, a concept in a way that would make a kid behave differently. And it just captured my imagination. And so I kind of grew up with my my audience a bit. I ended up teaching high school, vocational ed. I was a professor and a department chair at a local university. And then I went back into industry in learning and development roles until I ultimately went out on my own, continuing this, thread of how can I help primarily leaders and managers elevate the quality of the experience they cultivate for their employees. And central to that in the last 12 years or so have really been focused on this experience of career development, which we know is just, so important to happiness at work.
That's amazing, Julie. And it's interesting to hear your background because it does make sense in the context of the title of your book, which is Help Them Grow or Watch Them Grow. And to hear that you first worked with children, actually, I think goes nicely with that title, but I know it's not about children. What is your book about? And tell us a little bit about the premise of your book.
You're right. It is not about children, although we have had plenty of folks say, man, this did work on my kids. But the premise of the book is if we're not helping people to grow, they're going to go. They might leave the organization and take their talents elsewhere, or they might go, in terms of withdrawing their engagement and their enthusiasm and their contributions to the organization. And, it's not until recently that we've had words for that, like quiet quitting and quiet vacationing and bare minimum Mondays. When we first wrote the first edition of this book back in 2012, those terms weren't at the fore. They were sort of undercurrents that we kind of knew were happening. But today, leaders are keenly aware that if they're not helping the folks around them to grow and develop, there's really the potential for a huge loss of engagement and productivity and all the rest of the stuff that goes along with that.
So, Julie, right on that note, and I absolutely agree that if you are not working for your employee to help them grow, they will find that growth somewhere else. So what do you think about these recent announcements of like Amazon saying, come back into the office or leave? I'm curious what you think about people being called back to the office and how do you manage it? If you're the one that says, hey, you have to come back, what are your thoughts on the whole messy topic?
Yeah, so we've known, since the 60s, or was it the 70s, when the self-determination theory was brought to the fore by DC and Ryan. They helped us to understand that people are looking for certain things out of their work, these deep psychological needs, one of which is for autonomy or control. We like to be the boss of ourselves and have a say in what we do, how we do it, where we do it. I think folks for a long time sort of gave up their autonomy around location for work. You know, it was just the expectation. I mean, we all went to the office or wherever, the plant or the hospital, wherever we toiled. But then what happened, of course, I'm speaking to the converted here, you all know, the pandemic came and everything that came after, we were scattered to the winds. And people who had never had a taste of that autonomy suddenly thought, wow, this is kind of nice. Not just from a lifestyle standpoint, not just from a standpoint of I'm happier, you know, as a human being, but this is nice because I can be more productive. I can do that deep focused work. You know, I'm doing better work in this setting. And folks who had that experience now are understandably a little resistant to losing that autonomy and losing that sense of productivity and engagement and happiness and balance and everything that it brought. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances. And yet it's challenging. You know, I see the other side of it. For an organization, how do you ensure that you create the kind of tight culture that you want? You know, how do you ensure that people are learning by osmosis from one another when we're all together? But it does feel, you know, and I'm not going to speak for any organization strategy. It does feel like maybe the pendulum in some cases is swinging back a little bit further than is going to be helpful for the workforce. And if it's not helpful for the workforce, there are implications for the business.
Yeah. That's such a good way of saying it, the way you're talking about the autonomy piece. I'm curious, what do you see in terms of how the topic of career development starts to intersect with what you were just describing around autonomy? One of the things I am hearing is more and more people are like, wait, I really like doing this, being kind of my own boss relatively by working from home. Maybe I'm going to try to start my own company or become a consultant in some way. Like how do you see this return to work kind of push intersect with your work on career growth and career development?
Well, it's interesting, Laura. I was just reading some research from MasterCard, and their projection is that by the year 2030, 40 to 50% of us will be part of the gig economy. So I
Yeah.
think that answers, you know, in a pretty powerful way what the intersection is. Because you're right,
Yes.
people are getting a taste of entrepreneurship. They're getting a taste of having that sense of being my own boss and the
Right.
joys and the pains, you know, that come along
Yes.
with that. And so I think that folks who are put in a position that doesn't align with how they want to work, with where they want to work, with when they want to work, they've got more options than ever for doing something different, which is going to have huge implications for, you know, for traditional employers.
So, Julie, just to expand on that a bit more, because and I think it's really fascinating that research you cite from Mastercard, because I know also kind of in tandem, the World Economic Forum has said there's going to be a great skills deficit in geographies like North America by 2030. And so that kind of paired with a lot of workers are going to be migrating to the gig economy means that they will have more autonomy, and it might be much harder to hire those full-time skills that are required for companies in certain geographies. So what my question is when we talk about remote work, when we talk about hybrid work, what can managers do to build that connectivity between team members? You know, what are some tactics they can think about to, again, feel connected to their employees that they're working with, to help them professionally and personally grow in their jobs? What are some tools that they can tap into to help them manage that in that hybrid or remote workplace?
Yeah, yeah. And Tessa, I love, you know, you noted 2030. It sounds like a lot's going to be happening in 2030. We better
I
buckle.
know. I think that it seems so far off, and everyone keeps talking about 2030, but it's 6 years away. And you're right. It's like a lot is going to be happening in the workplace.
Yeah. So I'm hearing kind of two parts to your question. One is, what can leaders do to create that greater sense of connectivity? And then how does that translate into career development? Because what we found actually is they're two very different things. So, a lot of leaders have really developed some great practices and skills and rituals when it comes to connecting their teams. They're using technology well. They've got their Slack and team channels, and um, they have events. They organize themselves so that those who are in a hybrid setting are coming together, at the same time. So you have that co-located experience. I have one client who was just talking about they're actually specifically organizing the days at work into smaller pods because they found that when they brought everybody together, it was a little overwhelming. So they'll have fewer people, so there could be more of that specific one-on-one connecting, chatting, figuring out, how we can help each other. So my experience is a lot of leaders have cracked the code in terms of that generic sense of we're connected, we're talking, we have a regular cadence. Where it's really fallen down, though, is how do you translate that into career development? Because we saw almost immediately when people went remote that proximity bias just slipped in, and it's natural. I'm nothing, intentional on the part of leaders. It's just that natural human tendency to gravitate toward those who are close by. And so for so many folks, it became an out of sight, really did become out of mind. And we've seen, some research that suggests that the career development opportunities are less for those who aren't co-located. Folks who aren't co-located are seeing, promotions and pay differentials. And so the key really is for leaders to become way more self-aware, to check in on their biases and figure out what are they doing to create this uneven playing field. And in fact, when we wrote the third edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, we actually decided to include a whole chapter on developing at a distance because there's such a critical mass of folks who need this at this point. And we did a bunch of interviews with practitioners and authors and researchers to try to cull down the practices that help a remote leader or help a leader help remote people to grow. And it was less about the practices and the specific actions. The thing that we heard in 25 different interviews, this continuous thread of intentionality. When it comes to remote development, you got to do everything you do with co-located folks, but you've got to bring so much more intentionality to it because there's this invisible curriculum when we're all together. There's so much learning that we just pick up on by osmosis when you're watching the dynamics in a meeting or see what's happening, around the cubes that's lost. And if we don't bring some intentionality to narrating, to shining a light on that kind of thing, and some specific remote rituals, those folks who aren't co-located are going to really fall behind.
I love that. Julie, do I have permission to ask you this sort of like fun and messy question, and we'll just kind of see what pops up?
Go for it, Michael.
Okay, so this is a bit of a dilemma. So this is about Gen Z remote workers. They love their autonomy, love that freedom, but a side effect of that can be loneliness because you're not having that frequent human connection and human interaction with others. And you also get some Gen Zs who've never been to an office before. They've never seen that, and they don't understand or see the need for culture. How would a hybrid manager work with a workforce like that where they're happy, they're productive, everyone's doing well? Because there's so many sort of conflicting moving parts. Any advice for any listeners that are dealing with that?
Absolutely. And I think what you're painting is a picture that a lot of organizations are struggling with right now. And it's unique to the newer entrants to the workplace because, as you said, they don't know what they don't know. it feels like, okay, I got this. I've got my job down. I'm meeting my numbers. I'm doing everything. And they haven't yet experienced necessarily the value of learning from mentors, picking up on those cues, all of that cultural stuff that happens around the edges. And so for a leader who's facing that kind of thing, I mean, it's a bit of a, I don't know, bit of a sales job almost in telling your own story and sharing, here's how much I was able to learn by doing, the traditional stuff, but all the rest of the stuff, I would have never gotten to where I am had I not been able to hang with so and so who showed me the ropes around whatever it might be. Telling those personal stories starts to make it real, because otherwise it's just, it's like their parents talking at them, jabbering at them about, brushing their teeth or doing, the stuff you kind of know you should be doing. But when you make it really real and concrete like that, I think that's a game changer. The other thing is, when you do have the opportunity to get those newer entrants to the workforce into that co-located space, it's got to be gold in terms of the value that we bring. I mean, you talk about intentionality. It can't, and I'm not talking about the coffee carts or the, beer and ping pong or whatever. I'm talking about really meaningful interactions, bringing somebody into a senior level meeting that they might never have had visibility to before and letting them see the executives hash through stuff. I mean, you let a new Gen Z employee see that, they're sold. I mean, at that point, they're going to see this. I get the value of it.
Julie, that I love that it's got to be gold, because I think having that kind of standard is really important, because that's not happening, right? I mean, for most people, the gotta be gold is like, I come in and there's nobody else here, and then I just join a Zoom meeting, right? It's just not, the intentionality isn't there. But I love the way you just described that example. Yeah, if you had that kind of interaction, you got to meet somebody that you might not meet over a Zoom call. Those are the things that could make a really big difference. So those are great examples. One of the things I noticed on your LinkedIn is you were using this term HI, human interaction, needs to be paired with AI, artificial intelligence. And I just, that just really caught my eye. That sounds like such a great thing to remind ourselves all the time. Getting kind of specifically to career development, and I think you've been saying things kind of related to this, but specifically as it's related to career development and helping people grow, what about that human interaction is the most important? Just what are your thoughts on that kind of? There's so many automated systems and processes and tools now that especially big organizations have to support career growth, but of course the human interaction matters. So just would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it's the processes, the systems, the tools, the forms. They are all really important for manpower planning, for succession planning. Organizations need that data, so not to diminish any of that. But I have never spoken to an employee who said, I really got to where I am and grew so much because of the form that I filled out during the IDP process. I mean,
Right.
not where the growth happens. What I've really come to appreciate, Laura, is that career development at its core is a relationship. And it's a relationship that plays out through conversation. And it's conversation that's happening in an ongoing, iterative, kind of layered way over time. It's not those one and done, go away, spend 90 minutes, plot out everything you're going to do for the next, year, and then put it away and not look at it again until next year this time. So that from my perspective, development is all about the relationship itself. People feel invested in, they feel valued, they feel respected when a leader spends time talking about development. And that, as much as AI, and we created a book bot to go along with this new edition of the book. So I'm not a Luddite. I love the technology for sure, but it's only a tool that humans can use to create this experience of value that's just unbeatable in today's workplace.
So, one question I do want to ask, because I know you've done some significant work looking at this topic, but when it comes to psychological safety, and I actually was with a group from a client of ours, a company that was actually asking. They understand the concept of psychological safety, but they really were asking, well, how do I cultivate those skills? How do I put psychological safety into practice? How do I have it contribute to the culture? What kind of action do I need to take as a manager around psychological safety? So any kind of ideas or thoughts you can share around that topic and what managers can do to ensure psychological safety with their teams?
You bet. And I love Amy Edmondson and her work in this space. It is just, it's really brilliant. When it comes to development in particular, too, psychological safety is non negotiable. Because when you think about it, learning, growing, development, it's risky, messy business. There is a good chance that when I try to do something different, or better, or take on a new skill, I'm not going to be perfect at it. And people are only willing to take that kind of risk in the presence of a safety net, a psychological safety net, if you will. And so what I've seen in my clients and the leaders I work with that they do that creates that is to really communicate that sense of care and benevolence, their intention to be of service and help you grow. When people know that your goal is really to help them grow, that makes it's a game changer. It's about them normalizing mistakes, making it okay to fail, helping people develop the discipline of learning from those failures and being able to then elevate their performance next time or take their growth to the next level. One of the things that I hear more than anything when I ask people, who helped you grow the most and what did they do? It was, they threw me into the deep end, but then they had my back. They were there with the life preserver at the side of the pool when I was getting ready to go down for the third time. So knowing that you've got somebody who's got your back, again, creates that kind of an environment where you can step out and try something new. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and he had worked extensively with Cirque du Soleil. And he was talking about the nets. If you've ever seen any of those Cirque performances, I mean, they're way up there doing amazing things, but they've always got a net, not just because it's an OSHA requirement, which it is, but the performers actually do more and perform better when they know that net's down there. One person was saying, I know I can do a 3 turn, but without that net, I'm going to do 2. And isn't it great, if a leader can be that net to get every employee doing that third twist or turn up there?
Wow. So I'm going to ask a personal question because my new boss needs to listen to this podcast. And this is like an advanced class, and she's not at 101. So this is something that I think employees would need the words for. Let's say that you don't have a manager who is buying into, I need to grow your career and all that. It's more like you're the cog in the machine, you do what I want. That's sort of the attitude we're starting with. We opened up our conversation with her listing out 3 things I did wrong. I used a wrong email address, I used a wrong Microsoft link, blah blah blah. And I felt like I'm working for, Madam Gotcha. And the whole concept of me wanting to grow my career, which is doing more teaching on Zoom and teaching in Spanish. I mean, it's quite different. And I know that doesn't 100% fit the organization. I feel like if I told her that, I'd get fired and not be a fit. So how do I manage my manager when I don't see any interest in growing my career? Any advice?
Well, first of all, offline, give me your address. I'll send you a copy of the book, and you can just kind of slip it in under cover of darkness. In fact, my son, every time he leaves a job, he leaves a copy of my book on his boss's desk.
Oh, I'm gonna get it. Seriously, I'll buy it off of Amazon, but I'll slip it under there.
Just a little subtle. As an employee, and I love that's the focus here, is what can I do? Because as employees, we got to own our careers. Nobody's going to care any more than we do. And so being proactive about it and figuring out what kind of conversation is going to engage my boss, how can I help them help me, is really the first step. And then the second step is to make that conversation as non-threatening as possible. Most leaders who avoid career development with their folks do it because they're afraid that the person wants a promotion or something they're going to have to say no to. And so they'd rather just not even get into it. So going into the conversation with something that might be a yes, hey, I'd love to speak with you and get some feedback. It sounds like some of my communication isn't really hitting the mark. I might not be using the right channels. So I can fix that. But how about the rest of my communication? I'd love some feedback on how I'm communicating that might help me better do the teaching that I want to do online. And then the third thing is finding those win-win outcomes in terms of development plans. So you want to teach something in Spanish, might not be quite a fit, but where might there be something that you could do that would help you grow your skills, prepare you to do that more effectively, that would also serve the needs of the organization? So is it teaching in English for a little bit, working through the curriculum with a new audience that meets the organization's needs? So she could say, yeah, okay. And then you're using that to refine your approach and the curriculum so that when you get ready to translate it into Spanish, it's just perfecto.
Oh, well, Julie, our time has already run out here in this conversation today. So we are just so grateful for you joining us and for this really interesting conversation. It's really cool what you're doing. And so thank you so much for being part of our podcast.
Thank you. I'm just so happy to have been part of it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to hear future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Happy at Work podcast and leave us a review with your thoughts.
Are you interested in speaking on a future episode or want to collaborate with us? Let us know. You can send us an email at admin@happyatworkpodcast.com.
And lastly, follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter for even more happiness. See you soon.